Hi, I'm Steve Wiggins, and I'm going to be talking to you about books, specifically books that I've written. There aren't that many, and in this episode of the new and high-tech sort of video era, I'm going to only be talking about one, the first book, which was my doctoral dissertation. That explains why I'm dressed up like this in this fancy academic garb. Most books for academic authors start out as their dissertation, at least their first book does. And mine started out as an academic dissertation, as you might gather from what I just said, in Edinburgh, at Edinburgh University in the 1990s. That book was this one here, Reassessment of Asherah, and it also appears in this form, which I'll discuss a little bit later. Now, this book came about through the usual prospect or the usual means of settling on a dissertation topic and then writing a book about it. Doing a dissertation basically means taking 3 to 5 to 10 years of your life and trying to become an expert on a topic that nobody has explored before. And really, Asherah wasn't my first choice. I shouldn't say that now, I suppose, but it's the truth. My first choice was the god Dagon. Because Dagon's cool, you know? I mean, like, there's all the stuff with H.P. Lovecraft, and everybody wants to know what Dagon is, the fish god, and all this great stuff. The problem that I ran into was that you don't have a lot of information to go on when you want to write about Dagon. This is back, as I say, in the early 1990s, and my dissertation advisor actually is probably back in the 1980s at this point. My dissertation advisor and committee said there's not enough information. You can try, but you won't find enough information on Dagon. Of course, that meant I had to choose some other topic. Now, it's a little bit of an aside. A few years later, actually quite a few years later, I discovered this book, which came out after I wrote mine. And this is a book about Dagon. Indeed, there is enough material, but it wasn't widely enough known at the time I wrote my book. So, back to Asherah. Asherah was kind of a sexy topic in the 1990s because of some inscriptions discovered at a couple of places with the fancy names Kuntalat Ajrud and Khirbet el-Qum. These inscriptions that were discovered in these locations seem to indicate that God had a wife, which is pretty radical stuff back in the 70s when the inscriptions were first discovered. And so people wanted to know all about this. Well, that's not really what I was writing about. My books, I talk about it in both of these books, which are really just one book. This is simply the second edition of this, and I'll explain why in just a few minutes. But everybody wanted to know about Asherah because, you know, if God had a wife, don't you want to know about that? Yeah, of course you do. Well, my approach to it really had to do with the fact that I was into Ugarit. Now, it's nothing weird. Well, maybe it is. But Ugarit is a site where there was an ancient city in northern Syria that was destroyed before the Bible was even written, so it was gone before the Bible even came into existence. And in that city, there were a cache of clay tablets found as they were being excavated, as the city was being excavated. And those clay tablets told quite a bit about a goddess named Asherah. Now, there had been books written on the goddess before, but very few of them, if any of them, spent much time on the Ugaritic material. So I spent a few years doing some research on it and finding out everything I could about Asherah in that culture, where she is best known, and wrote my book on that. The book also does cover Asherah in the inscriptions I mentioned. It covers Asherah in the Hebrew Bible. It covers Asherah in Mesopotamia, which is the earliest culture that mentions her, and even has a little section on Asherah in material from what is ancient Yemen, and is today, or was the language that it was written in was known as epigraphic South Arabian. Not much material there, but it's, you know, something to go by. So these were the sources I looked at, and as is typical when you're a new PhD, when you start looking for topics to write articles on after you finish your book, you kind of look at other stuff that's related. So I wrote several articles about Asherah over the years and had them published in various academic journals. Now, I taught for a number of years after I wrote the book, and after that, I went into publishing for a job for the time being. And in that in that field, I got hired by a publisher in Piscataway, New Jersey, known by the name of Gorgias Press. They were a fairly new publisher at the time, and I was a fairly new editor. And so one day I'm sitting talking to my boss saying, hey, why don't you get the paperback rights to my book and we can make a paperback edition? Well, as you can see, it's not paperback, is it now? My boss did get the rights to reprint the book, and he did it with the articles that I had written about Asherah. So the content of these books is actually identical, except this one has a bit more information. It has the articles in it as well. And up until the articles section of the book, they are identical. And so I had these two books that have pretty much the same title and pretty much the same contents, but I count them as one book when I'm looking at things that I've written. Now, I suppose the question that is on everybody's mind, did Yahweh have a wife? Well, you know, I don't really know, and I've never met her, but I do know that the evidence was kind of overblown for many people, and I really do hope that God had a wife. It'd be nice of him to have a happily ever after sort of married situation. But as far as the evidence goes, it's not really that clear. And it would make sense, yes, but it's just not, it's not as straightforward as people would like you to think. Because I came to a conclusion that most scholars don't like, my work has been primarily ignored by people at least in the United States, and I've continued on to some other book projects, and I'll come back and talk about those later. I'll take the approach of not dressing like some sort of professor, because I'm not a professor anymore, and I will discuss with you a little bit in more detail my next two books. And if you find this interesting, I hope you'll spend some time looking around my blog where I talk quite a bit about these topics. And in any case, whether you decide to look at any more or not, thank you for your time. I appreciate you viewing this. And hopefully as these videos get more practiced and polished, they'll get a little bit more high-tech and maybe a bit more fun to watch. But got to start somewhere, right? And dissertation is a good place to start. Thanks for watching. Bye.